It's one of the jobs with the highest stakes on the planet.
Do it, blood, sweat, and tears, but you can go unconscious and hopefully you wake back up in time to recover the aircraft before it impacts the ground.
They're fast as lightning.
Where the margin for error is so small, one mistake could result in death.
I need to move my jet. However, I'm upside down. We're gonna hit each other.
If you don't succeed, you jeopardize the safety of your country.
Those guys are relying on you to sometimes save their lives. If you make a mistake, you can be putting them in even more danger than they were in before you got there.
It really is the backbone of the United States Air Force and our military.
So risking their lives to make sure that you remain free.
The U.S. Air Force tasked with defending your freedom every day.
Major Michelle Curran is the one and only female pilot for the Thunderbirds.
Has logged 13 years as an Air Force F-16 combat fighter pilot.
She is one of only 6 female fighter pilots in the 69-year-old history of the Thunderbirds. She had to be willing to die for the mission.
Courage and fear, they are interwoven.
And she almost did.
It's been game over for both of us.
But because she learned the lessons in this video, she was able to survive.
And you're not just surviving in that environment, you're actually doing the missions.
She stared death in the face multiple times.
Where you really, really have to push yourself to overcome your natural survival instinct.
But survived to share these lessons that we often learn too late. This conversation I had with Michelle Curran taught me some incredible lessons, and I knew how impactful it would be if I shared them with others. Michelle Curran is a former U.S. Air Force fighter pilot and Thunderbird. She served for over 13 years, where she flew over 1,500 flights with the Air Force. During her time flying, she had a number of insanely close calls, and the lessons she learned from them are worth hearing regardless of your career and if you fly planes or not. Now, before I go into the 5 lessons, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more videos and interviews with the most motivational people on the planet. Okay, lesson number 1. Things will always go wrong. How you react to those things could be the difference between life and death. Michelle told me about 2 of the really close calls she had while she was on the Thunderbirds. The first one, she actually hit a vulture while she was flying over Colombia. Now this is a bird that can have up to a 5-foot wingspan, and for those not familiar with fighter jets like myself, they only have one engine air take. Fortunately for her, in this case, it only hit the edge of the engine air take, but the vulture did put 2 holes in her plane. If it had been just a bit further to the side and hit the intake straight on, she might have had to eject. This actually happened to a different pilot just a few years ago and they barely survived. Fortunately, they ejected just in time. The second close call Michelle had was during an air show as a Thunderbird. She was performing a maneuver where 2 planes cross over each other so closely that they look like they're going to collide, and to make things more complicated, one of the planes is actually upside down.
He's been too far away and he's about to be way too close, like going to hit me too close. And so in my head, I'm like, okay, we have a contract for this. I need to move my jet towards my side of the line, the safe side of the line that I own, which is towards the crowd. However, I'm upside down, where left is now right. And we are out over a training range north of Las Vegas, where it's just brown desert. There is no crowd out there. Our show line is not a runway. It's a bunch of Connex containers, like shipping containers from the back of a truck lined up. The right side of it and the left side of it look identical. It's just flat brown dirt. And so while I'm hanging upside down, I suddenly have this realization that I am not 100% sure what side of the line is mine. And I know if I move my jet with my rudder, so I like move it left or right without banking my wings, if I move it to the wrong side, we're both gonna move last second to the same side, we're gonna hit each other. Like that is the highest risk area. And so I make a decision to not move. And all of this decision making and thought process and everything, it happens in maybe 2 seconds. And so I hold my spot, and last second I see I'm upside down, right? So he's gonna pass under the belly of my airplane where I can't see him because I can't see through the floor of the airplane. So I see him coming, his jet gets very, very big. And then I see him start to roll his wings as he disappears. And I don't say anything. I'm supposed to make a radio call there for us to flip positions. I don't say anything because I'm in like shock right now. I'm like, oh, well, we didn't hit each other. I'm still alive. We're still good. And I roll upright, and eventually I make the radio call for us to clear the line. I will never know how close our airplanes got to each other, but really damn close. If we had hit each other, it would have just been game over for both of us. But I think it's a really interesting example of how your mind can change the concept of time how you can get temporal distortion, how your brain slows things down. And the only way you get to that point is through a lot of training, a lot of repetition. And I think I made the right decision to not move. And it does make you think of how serious of a business you're in, but you also are the best trained at it in the world.
Michelle then goes on to talk about the key lessons with these close calls. You may not be flying a fighter jet, but there will always be things that are out of our control. When this happens, there are 4 steps you can take. Number 1, practice, practice, practice. Repetition and the reflexes you learn through practice can save you in these situations. As Michelle says, your skill level catches up to you. Number 2, maintain control. In her case, keep flying. Number 3, pause and analyze the situation. Even if the bird hits the engine, the plane could still glide and she could eject herself. And lastly, number 4, take proper action. Again, if you're prepared for every possibility, there should always be a next step that you have in mind. There's another reason why practice and repetition are so important. The bravest people, like Michelle, aren't fearless. They just have the will to face their fears. And Michelle says practice is what helps her get to a point where she can do it even when she's scared. Okay, on to lesson number 2. Debrief your projects with your team and be open to feedback. One of the most crucial parts of the practice and repetition that Michelle is so adamant about is review. She says that as a fighter pilot, she would often fly a mission and then spend 4 times that amount of time debriefing that mission.
We pride ourselves in is, going and flying a mission and then spending sometimes like 4 times as long in the debrief setting where we look at an entire flight. Every little piece of it, everyone that's made a mistake talks about it, whether you're a young lieutenant, which is the lowest rank, or you're leading the entire organization and you're a colonel and you've been doing this for 20 years. If you made a mistake during that flight, you're fessing up. And we're looking at why it happened, if it was bad information, if it was a poor decision, whatever it was, so that we can kind of figure out why things went awry and how we can learn from it to do better next time. And not everyone thrives in that environment, regardless of gender. And so I think that can be something that anyone can take into any career field, going in with that mentality where when you show up, you don't know everything. And I think especially if you're a woman in a male-dominated career field and you do feel like there's this extra attention, extra pressure on you. I mean, I fell into this trap when I was young in my first assignment. You feel like you have to prove yourself. And so you feel like you have to put up this facade of bravado of like knowing everything and being the best at everything. And I kind of shot myself in the foot by doing that because I missed out on opportunities where I should have admitted I didn't know and I should have asked for extra help. And not only would that have helped me learn the thing I was struggling with, but it would have also helped me build, strong relationships with the people around me and find mentors. And all of that would have just helped me move forward in my career a lot quicker at the beginning. Instead, I kind of struggled on my own, just feeling like I needed to do it all alone just to prove that I deserved to be there.
One of the things that really stood out to me about these debriefs is that everyone enthusiastically accepts feedback from all levels and all positions, both people who are superior to you and below you. I know this can be a difficult thing to accept, but it is key to building high-functioning teams. By including and listening to everyone in the conversation, you are able to gain fresh perspectives and learn from everyone. On to lesson number 3. You deserve to be where you are, even if you might not feel as talented or worthy as others believe. Don't doubt your own skills and abilities. Michelle talked to me quite a bit about imposter syndrome. For those that don't know, imposter syndrome is the inability to believe that your success is deserved or has been achieved as a result of your efforts. And Michelle deals with this feeling often.
I still deal with it now. I just have perspective on it that it's normal and I don't let it stop me from taking action.
Michelle had to deal with imposter syndrome after she was accepted to become a fighter pilot. It's interesting to hear someone as successful as her talking about feeling that she isn't good enough. But to be fair, I can relate to this sometimes, and maybe you can too. As the CEO of my company with no formal, CEO training, some days it can be hard to keep those thoughts of doubt out of my head. But the key that she talks about is to recognize that you're not alone with these feelings and don't be afraid to be vulnerable and talk about it with others. Whatever the case may be for you, it is important that you don't fall into this line of thinking. Be yourself, do your very best, and believe that you have been selected for a reason.
Early on is when it was definitely the worst and when I wasn't very equipped to deal with it. It still pops up even now, but I have much better perspective on it. My first assignment, I'd gone through all those years of training. I get to Misawa, Japan, which is my first combat squadron. Misawa is a really isolated, smaller city. It's way up in the northern part of Japan. Generally, English is not widely spoken there. You're isolated, I guess. And so your squadron, your wingmen in your unit become your everything. They're your neighbors, they're your friends, they're your family on holidays. They become everything. And so I step into that environment, and I'd gone through all these years of training, and they had gone pretty well. And you feel like you should be fairly equipped when you get to that point. And when I got there, I actually discovered that what I had learned up to that point was just the tip of the iceberg. That being a fighter pilot was way more complicated than the actual physical flying of the airplane. That was something that you had to get to the point where you could do it in the periphery in your sleep practically, because you had to be monitoring all these sensors, understanding your weapon systems, understanding the enemy's weapon system, understanding other platforms, other good guy platforms that are working together with you. And it's very complex. You're multitasking, you're thinking way ahead, you have to have situational awareness of 3 dimensions on a huge scope. And I got there, and in hindsight, I think I was probably a pretty average brand new wingman. But up until that point, I had done well at things. Like I had, got a scholarship, I had gotten a pilot slot, and then I'd gotten a fighter jet, which was just against the odds. And I'd made it through all these courses, and all of a sudden I get to Misawa, and there's just so much information to learn that no matter how many hours a day I put in trying to learn it, I could not get my arms around it. It was going to take months and months and months. And that was new for me. And so it kind of shook my identity of like, do I even belong here? Like, who am I if I'm not the person that's good at this stuff, if I'm not like above average at everything? And I also really felt like I had to put on this facade to fit into the squadron. I had some were accurate and some were misconceptions. I had this idea of what being a fighter pilot meant. And in my mind, everyone was very type A, everyone was very assertive, very confident. And I'm more soft-spoken and reserved, and I was a really shy kid. I'm a little bit more introverted. And I'm also very empathetic, and I feel like I focus more on EQ type skills, and that just isn't necessarily what comes out at the forefront in that environment. And so you layer that in with being one of 2 women in the squadron of about 50 people, and I did feel like I was under a microscope, and I really felt like I had to prove myself. So I couldn't show weakness. I couldn't show vulnerability. I couldn't ask questions when I had them because I didn't want people to realize I didn't know the answer already. And all of this created this perfect scenario where I felt very isolated. I felt like I didn't deserve to be there, like this was the wrong career path for me, even though I worked so hard to get there. And I really felt like no one else was experiencing that. And in hindsight, having talked to some of the other people that were young in their career at the same squadron at the same time, they all felt that way. Maybe not the gender part of it, but they all felt like they were trying to establish a reputation in this new community. Like they were trying to learn so much information that it was overwhelming, but I felt very isolated. And so I think a huge part of dealing with it is getting perspective that it is not an uncommon thing, that you are not the only one experiencing it, and sharing that you're struggling with that feeling with other people who are in similar experience level to you. I almost guarantee that as soon as you're like, man, I really feel like I don't belong here, like sometimes I'm questioning if this is the right decision, if I'm ever going to be good enough, they're going to be like, thank you for sharing that, because I feel the exact same way, and no one talks about it.
Okay, lesson number 4. The odds of achieving your dream might be low, but go for it anyways. Michelle told me about a time when she was training with her class. The odds of becoming a fighter pilot are extremely low. First, you need 20/20 vision, which eliminates around 70% of people. And then if you do get in, usually only 1 or 2 students from a class of 25 get picked to go to actual fighter pilot training. And as a woman, her odds were even lower. Up until 30 years ago, women were not even allowed to be fighter pilots in the US military. Even today, only 3% of Air Force fighter pilots are women, so the change is happening, but slowly. And I can see why it was once a faraway dream for Michelle. But just because it may have been a low chance doesn't mean it's impossible. After one of her training flights, one of her instructors gave her a piece of advice that changed her life.
I remember we were doing like different types of landings. This wasn't like complex missions. This was building blocks, baby stuff. And the flight had gone well. And we land, and a lot of times after a good flight, you'll still go through the debrief process. You'll still look at things where that could have been better, because it's not perfect ever. But it'll end with like, hey, good work, keep it up, see you next flight. And that's it. And you're like, done. And you get your grade sheet and you go on about your business. This instructor, who had flown F-15s before, so fighter pilot background, I really respected him. He did all of that, but then at the end he said, that was a really good flight. I think if you continue to take instruction the way that you are and continue to put in the amount of work that you are, that there is a really good chance that you will get a fighter aircraft out of this program. And I knew what the odds of getting a fighter aircraft at the end of pilot training were. I mean, I was watching other classes ahead of me go through their drop nights where they were finding out their airframes, and it was anywhere between 1 per class of 25-ish students to maybe 3 on the high end. And I knew the odds were not in my favor. And so to have someone that I really respected take the time to say just that one little piece of it, like feedback, that motivated me so much. It uplifted me so much. It gave me more confidence in the aircraft. And it really helped push my performance to keep doing well and keep getting better. And I tried to remember that when I was an instructor, like even if someone had a bad flight, to try to leave them with ways to fix it, things they could work on and focus on to get better, but also to not be the one that just crushes their hopes and dreams. Instead, to be the one that's like, but you can do this, and here's why. And I think it was especially important that he didn't just say, you're doing great, keep it up, you will probably get a fighter. He put some criteria in there, some caveats, right? Like, you have to continue to take feedback as well as you are. You have to continue to work as hard as you are. And so I think he didn't even probably do this intentionally, but the way he crafted it was really impactful for me.
This positive advice she received didn't make her cocky or overconfident. That isn't the demeanor or work ethic of a fighter pilot. Instead, it pushed her to keep putting the work in. That is the attitude you need if you want to be successful. And that attitude has really paid off. Because Michelle's work as a fighter pilot and her advocacy for women in the Air Force, she has been able to inspire countless young girls, especially during the Thunderbird shows. Okay, the final lesson, lesson number 5. Don't join a team you don't trust and respect. The military is one of the most coordinated organizations in the world. It's one of the most advanced examples of teamwork you can find. People have to work together because there's lives on the line. You need to make sure that you earn the trust and the respect of your teammates, and it would be impossible to perform at a high level when you don't trust your team yourself. One last close call. Michelle's first high-stakes mission was in Afghanistan. Her wingman unexpectedly had to refuel, leaving her alone in a high-risk situation. In seconds, she had to connect via radio to a person she had never met before and follow their instructions immediately. Without the coordination and the trust of her teamwork, she wouldn't have been able to complete the mission.
Anytime American troops or our allies, which were Afghan troops as well, needed air support, so they, were in a firefight, they were in an environment where they needed top cover, we were getting called to that tasking. And that is one of the most rewarding missions, if not the most rewarding, that you can do. But it's also extremely stressful because it's very high stakes. Those guys are relying on you to sometimes save their lives. And more than that, you have the pressure of, if you make a mistake, you can be putting them in even more danger than they were in before you got there. And so for me, that was my first deployment. And, our instructors would tell us all these stories beforehand. And these were guys, at least that I was learning from, that had deployed to Afghanistan 6 times, 8 times. We had been in that war for a long time. And so they were very experienced in that region and those types of missions. And they were like, it's going to be surreal. The first time you drop anything in combat is going to be surreal. The first time you do it in a situation where American lives are on the line, it's going to be even more surreal. And it's likely going to be bad weather, at night. Your wingman in the F-16, only one pilot, but we would always fly with at least 2 aircraft so we could have mutual support between each other. Your wingman probably had to leave to go air refuel, to go get gas airborne, because we would, kind of leapfrog. One would go, then the other would go, so that there was always someone there if something happened. And you're like, sure. And I mean, that's what happened to me. My most memorable mission by far was at night. My wingman was there. We had been waiting to hit a target. It was danger close, which means that the target is so close to friendly forces that there's a higher than normal risk that they could actually get hit by shrapnel from your weapon impact. And so you only will employ weapons in that environment if it's high stake, like it needs to happen, right? That's part of the risk assessment. And so this was one of those situations, which adds an extra layer of risk, an extra layer of stress. And so we had kind of gone through the whole plan between our two aircraft, and we hadn't gotten clearance yet from higher headquarters to employ our weapons, and he needed to go get gas. So he left me by myself over the target area, went to air refuel, and 2 minutes after he left, I got the call that I was cleared to employ on the radio. And so by myself, first time deployed. Luckily, there ended up being a UAV, so a drone, above me in the air that had the ability to help with the attack, to help guide the weapon in with a laser. And they chimed in on the radio. I had no idea who they were. We had not coordinated any of this, but I think it was a really cool example of just the level of trust and teamwork within the military as a whole, because within 30 seconds, I was rolling in, employing the weapon off my jet. They were guiding it in off of their aircraft, and we hit the target perfectly, achieved the mission effects we were looking for. The threat was mitigated, and it ended, as it should have. Everything went as planned. But that was a very stressful moment for me. I remember when I got clearance and I knew my wingman was gone, and I'm trusting someone who I've never met in person, and it's a high stakes environment. So that one definitely will stick in my memory.
Thank you for watching this video. I'm Joel. If you're new to this channel, please subscribe. Every subscriber matters as we're just getting started here. We have more interviews and videos like this one with the most motivational people in the world and the lessons they've learned that will change your life coming very soon.